constructive criticism, honestly, I would like to hear that too. That people go, you need to work on your crutch words. Stop saying an okay as much.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to a new episode of Behind the Content by NeatCast Studio. Today we have Zack Derby with us, otherwise known as Zack Deuce on Twitter. Welcome, Zack.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to sit down and chat.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's great to have you. You're involved in a bunch of different podcasts. You work independently, and you've had quite a journey in podcasting. So first things first, I would love to hear a little bit about how you got into podcasting, what encouraged you to do so, and how did you get from the beginning of that to being in 3 shows now, Neat, Effin Cultured, and Podcasters Assemble?
So it all started, my background is actually radio. So that's my professional job. That's what I do on a day-to-day basis. So, it's podcasting, but over, the radio. And podcasting has certainly exploded over a number of years. How I got involved with it was with Mike and Jeremy over at the NeatCast. And I met them a long time ago online playing World of Warcraft. And eventually became friends. I live in New Hampshire. They live in New York. We actually did meet up eventually so that I could actually see what these people look like. And years later, when the pandemic happened and everybody was sitting at home, everybody was starting a podcast. Mike and Jeremy, along with their friend Mark, started the NeatCast. And it was let's just talk about whatever, a little bit of pop culture, a little bit of silliness, sports, cryptid, spooky stuff. I started my Twitter account just to help support them and, boost and share, back in the day when it was a bit easier to do that. And then they invited me to start guesting on the podcast. And for a long time, I did not host a podcast. I was a professional guest jumping from podcast to podcast. And then from there, Bobby, Rick, and Griff over at Effin Cultured, they had started their podcast as well. I've known Rick through my wife for a number of years, and he had gone on the podcast saying, we should have Zack. He'd fit in great here. And then finally, at one point, I reached out to Bobby, and I said, hey, Rick has mentioned, for me to join. I'd love to join you guys, and started guesting over there occasionally. And then with Podcasters Assemble, I got involved with that by listening to a few of the other podcasts in their network. And Podcasters Assemble is a 80s, 90s style movie recap. And it started back when Avengers Endgame was coming out. One of them had the idea of going, let's recap all of the Marvel movies counting down to Endgame. They took all these different podcasters and they all submitted 5 to 15 minutes worth of audio, and they spliced it together. I heard a few of their sessions and said, wow, I want to contribute every movie that I can. And we do some spin-offs where we just talk about a movie or whatever it is. And those are the disassembled episodes. That's how I got involved with podcasting. And now I'm a host of NeatCast because Mark decided to step back. He's got 2 kids, and that's where his focus is. And I'd been tolerated so much by Mike and Jer that they said, hey, why don't you come join us? And so that's where I've been for the past year or so.
Okay, that's interesting to hear that you got into it because of personal connections and passions. You mentioned that you started
Sure.
out in radio. I would love to hear more about that and your transition from radio to podcasting. Does it help you in explaining to people what a podcast is?
The transition from radio to podcasting?
Yeah.
So it's for me, it's very easy because, radio is comprised usually of people behind the scenes that are working like the sales, marketing, business side, and then the on-air side for production and promotion. I'm of the on-air side, so sitting in a room with a microphone and talking, it's not that hard for me to do. It's much easier when you have other people because then you have a conversation and you're not just by yourself. And really that's where I've always enjoyed my radio career, is when I get to do interviews, when I get to go out and broadcast live, when we get to do fun events and have that interaction with the public or other people in radio or the community. For me, it was natural to sit down with other people and have a conversation. A lot of times when the podcast starts, they're still finding their footing because they've never sat down with a microphone and gone, all right, how do I talk to people? How do I have a conversation like what you and I are doing right now? That doesn't always come natural to people. And for me, it didn't come natural. I had experience of being in radio. And so for me, it was pretty easy and seamless to be able to jump into a room and talk. That podcasting is similar to a lot of talk radio, but it is available in a variety of different formats, whereas radio is limited by your signal area. Most stations will stream, or now stations will actually offer a podcast of their own. And it's usually a segment of their show that maybe goes outside the limitations of the FCC, because we can't talk about certain topics. You certainly can't use certain words on terrestrial radio. This allows people on air to cover something that may not be okay for their station.
Yeah, totally. I love that because we need more podcasts and more podcast listeners. So your transition from radio being in more of a corporate environment, right, as opposed to now being independent. I'm also interested in hearing what that was like for you. What is it like being an independent podcaster and working with different people on trying to build a listenership and produce your own show?
Corporate radio. I did work for a company that had probably around 20 to 30 radio stations. It wasn't one of the major ones, but it was a decent size in the Northeast of America. You were very limited on what you could do. It was, this is what you're allowed to, this is the music you're allowed to play. These are the certain things that you were allowed to talk about. Very, very micromanaged and controlled. There's a certain, I guess, image that they want to work with, and it has to be okay for the entire company. As I've gone through my career, my stations have either been sold off or companies have separated stations. So I've continued to work for a smaller company every time. And my current company is locally owned, and we only have 3 radio stations. I oversee the programming for all 3, and I see my owner every day. So we're able to talk and help drive the direction of the radio stations for the programming, sales, and marketing. That I really like, having that local control and connection with the community and the owner. With podcasting, and especially being an independent podcaster, you are free to do whatever you want. You can cover any sort of topics. You have no limitation. You're not being monetized yet. For podcasts that I know that are able to find sponsors, sometimes it does come with hey, you have to mention this client or this sponsor here and there. And sometimes it's as simple as, well, you just need to give up a certain amount of your content time to run these ads. Every podcast, every network is different, and your limitations are going to, much like radio, it's going to change depending on who your sponsor is, what the advertising requirements are, and what your agreement. The bigger you get, if it's similar to radio, the more restrictive it may be of your content, what you can say, because it becomes more of a business. If you continue to drive your listeners away, that's not what they want, obviously. No matter what it is, even radio, I'm passionate about it. I love it. You serve the community. It is still a business, and you still have to find a way to make money to operate, pay your employees, or you won't be able to do what you love to do, which is broadcast and serve your community.
Definitely. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that podcasters deal with, finding that sustainable rhythm of producing to get to an audience and then also be able to monetize. So what have been the best ways that you and your co-hosts have worked on to help market your podcast? What have been the most efficient, but also the most fun things that you've done to try to market it?
So the most fun has been the networking with other podcast hosts. I've met a lot of great people, not necessarily in person. Some of them I have, but I've talked to a lot of people in a variety of different podcasts, and a lot of them have a different, unique approach to their content. And that's a big key, is finding something unique that is going to entice people to listen and to continue to to listen and grow. If you find that niche, that connection, that interest that people are looking for, you are going to grow, and you have to be unique to a certain point. I don't know, because we've tried a variety of different things, and I don't see the numbers for every podcast that I'm on. I know for NeatCast, we've seen the numbers go up and down. It's really dependent also at different times of the year and how often you release an episode. If you release one every other week, you're only going to have so many downloads. If you're doing it every week, you have a chance of getting more downloads. If you do it daily, that might be too much for people, depending on their lives. It's dependent on the listeners and when they have access to listen. There's days where I can't listen to a podcast because I'm busy working from home. But then there's other days where I am driving into the station and I have, 45 minutes to put on a podcast or two and listen on the way. The social media we've tried, and unfortunately, I can't say for certain what does and what does not work. I utilize Twitter, now X, for a lot of trying to cross-promote different podcasts. And I would have on my feed, someone would come up going, "Hey, I'm looking for a podcast. Do you have any recommendations?" And I had less than 10 people that had commented. I went, "All right, yeah, I'll throw some recommendations." And I would say, here's one for comedy. Here's one for movies. Here's one for books. Whatever things that I had found that I listened to. And I would try to share that. But if they had a lot of comments, I usually would shy away from it. And I would always try to put forward NeatCast and Effin Cultured and Podcasters Assemble whenever I could, but also try to feature other podcasts that would be concentrating on something different. So I did my damnedest to help everybody.
No, but that's
know.
a great tip, because something that is often overlooked by some people in the industry is really like the power of community, the power of recommendations, and of interacting with people in the industry. I mean, I think there's this misconception of competition, right? So if someone listens to my podcast, then they're going to go over on that feed and not come back to mine. And that's not really how it works, because if someone loves podcasts and is interested in the topic that you talk about, or the topics in your case, because it's so varied in your podcast, then they're likely also going to listen to another one and come back to yours, because it's about the personalities you bring in, right?
And that is something that has worked well, and that you do see a boost in numbers when you bring in other podcasters as guests, or if you're a guest, you help them and bring them numbers, because you want to try and share awareness and expose people to other potential podcasts and interests. And we have a good selection of podcast friends from other mediums that guest with us, and we hope that they bring some people over and that they are entertained by that episode, and hopefully they come back after that. And if they don't, that's okay. The biggest part is trying to provide content and entertainment. I do personally look at reviews and star ratings. There's a variety of podcast platforms that you can listen to. Ratings help in a couple different ways. For people that want to look at a podcast as a whole and what the content's like, how it's received, I do take the stars into account, and I like to read the reviews. This sounds like a good podcast. It also really helps the content creators. You're having fun doing it, but you do want to know that people are listening. You want to know what people like and also what maybe they don't like for constructive criticism. A decent rating and a decent, "Hey, I really liked your episode," or "I really liked your podcast," reinforces what you're doing. It solidifies the purpose of what you're doing. Even though you may be enjoying what you're doing and you love it, we do need a little bit of reaffirmation here and there. It goes a long ways when someone just reaches out and says, "Hey, you guys are funny. Thank you for starting my Mondays," or "We love your breakdown of the movie. I have the exact same thoughts and opinions on it." And if it's constructive criticism, honestly, I would like to hear that too. That people go, "You need to work on your crutch words. Stop saying I'm an okay as much." Yeah, you're right. My job is to talk and I use crutch words, or I pause, or I say, it's human nature, but it's stuff that always we can work on. Really, that helps, I think, also for the content creators, as well as helping other people find a podcast.
100%. That's why everyone at the end of their podcast or at the beginning is, leave a rating, leave a review, because I think it's so important to have that human connection. It's just the two or the three of you, and you don't really get that response, maybe like you have the opportunity sometimes on the radio. And it
Hmm.
also shows potential new listeners that, hey, someone was here, someone listened to this, and you might like it as well. So, a great tip. How do you build a relationship with your listener base? How do you use social media? Do you pose questions to them? How do you build that long term relationship and make them feel they're involved in the development of the podcast?
I take the same approach with my interactions with podcasting that I do with radio. People want that interaction. They want to have their request played. They want you to answer the phone when they call or respond back when they send an email. It's the same thing with podcasting because as much as we want to hear from our listeners, they want to hear back from us. I love reaching out to a podcast and posing a question or interacting with them and then having them go, hey, that's good. I like that. And responding to it because then it shows, all right, well, they do care about me as the listener. I'm getting something out of this and so are they. To have that same approach of interaction, that is key, whether you do it by just social media posting questions, whether you have I know quite a few podcasts have a answering machine, essentially, a voicemail that you can call in and leave a question or comment, and they will use that during their podcast. A lot of them have a Discord that you can go and join and consistently post and talk there. I'm on so many different Discords, I have to keep turning off notifications because people are interacting on a variety of different podcast Discords. So interaction with your listeners, interaction with your podcast that you like to listen to is a big key factor, again, in my opinion.
Yes, definitely. And it's very interesting what you said at the end as well, because not everyone who makes podcasts also listens to podcasts, but it's such an important thing to do, not only to get to know other hosts or to make podcast friends, but also to get a hint of, especially if you're starting out, how should I structure a podcast? How should I get in touch with my audience? How should I tell people to leave a rating and review? How do I encourage them to do that? Because, of course, everyone says it, but maybe you can find creative ways to do it.
People have done a thank you package to listeners, whether it be stickers. People love free stuff. It doesn't matter what it is. Everybody wants a t-shirt. They'll take a sticker, a magnet, a pen, because it's free. I've gotten things from my friends in podcasting because I've given them reviews. I've rated them. I've tried to pod lift other podcasters trying to help podcasters. And that's a way they said, hey, thanks for just being you. And so I've gotten stickers, and Jeremy has sent out stickers from the NeatCast. I don't know if Bobby has, but we have sent out stuff from the NeatCast as a thank you to people. We appreciate you taking the time to listen, to respond to us. And people just love free stuff. So if you give them an incentive, maybe that's a way to have them help build an initial rating. You're just asking your friends to give you an honest rating like you would with anything. Hey, I just started a podcast. Would you give it a listen? And if you like it, give a review or rating. I've never told people or asked people, hey, just go and do that. I've never been a fan of the rating swap, which I know was a big thing as well, that people would just go and say, hey, I'll give you 5 stars if you give me 5 stars. If you do that, that's perfectly fine. I personally haven't done that because I want my ratings or reviews to be really from my perspective. We want to swap promos, we want to swap guests, but for me, I don't like to swap ratings because then it seems a little disingenuous. Again, that's me. However, somebody else wants to do it, you can do it, and maybe it works.
Yeah, I think if you're making a podcast friend and you listen to their podcast and you love it, that totally makes sense. But if you're just doing it to have something there, it's not worth it. And it's not sustainable either. A lot of people do that on social media as well, like the follow for follow
Hmm.
kind of strategy. And yeah, that
Yep.
that doesn't really work because it's like you said, it can come across as disingenuous. And since we're talking about podcast friends again, I want to ask you if you have any tips for our listeners who maybe are not connected in the industry or don't know how to reach out or are trying to do it in a time efficient manner. How would you go about it, finding podcast friends, building those relationships? Which events did you go to? What did you look for on Twitter? As specific as you can would be helpful for our listeners.
So a lot of it was for me just because I had the personal relationship to start with Jeremy and Mike and guesting with them, and then also knowing Rick at Effin Cultured, and he got me involved with them. With Podcasters Assemble, it came because I heard a cross promotion for another podcast that they were doing within their network. That is how I found them, not just for listening purposes, but also to be involved. Something that we try to do with the NeatCast is we have typically 4 different segments per episode. And when we transition from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, we put in a independent podcaster. And we are always looking for more. Some of them are the friends and other podcasters that we work with a lot. We're not a part of a network, but we try to rotate through and utilize the different promos to cross promote. But we do get occasionally a new one that someone says, hey, I heard you guys are playing, local independent podcasters. Would you mind playing my promo? Yeah, sure. And would you also play ours? For people that don't have that personal connection, using social media, for me, Twitter was a big way to find that. I've seen a big drop off of the podcast community being able to network through Twitter, now X, but there are other ways to do that. A lot of the ways that you can listen to podcasts now, they will give you a way to contact them or to network. One of the ones that I've used before is Good Pods. There's a lot of podcasters that use that and can connect, and you can create groups through Good Pods so you can share and collaborate. But if you're doing it right, every podcaster should have a way to have someone contact you and then just put it out there that you would love to collaborate, that you would love to be a guest. If you're ever going to have a guest on your podcast, don't just have a guest to have a guest. Have somebody that will work with your podcast and your content and talk to them ahead of time. Don't just have them on there just to have them on there. Do your due diligence.
Yeah, it's great that you bring up cross promos. They're honestly such a key marketing element for podcasters, I think especially independent podcasters, cuz like we were saying before, there's really no competition. There shouldn't be that kind of mindset. So they drive up listeners right from your experience. Like it's one of the more efficient ways to bring in new people when doing cross promos.
It's tough to
Mhm.
tell if it is a long-term answer, because I've seen and been told that when you do have a guest, depending on which podcast, on NeatCast, I can attest to, when you have a guest, numbers do typically go up because you are pulling people over that aren't typically here because they want to hear from this individual or these few people. Those are, whoever it may be. So I get their normal podcast. I also get them on another podcast this week. And sometimes you will see those numbers the following week are still higher than normal. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's a direct reaction, and the drop date of your podcast automatically has higher numbers. Sometimes you don't get those higher numbers till later in the week. Like I said, we've seen it ebb and flow over the course of a calendar year, that things go up in the spring and then kind of down in the summer and then kind of trend back up in the fall and winter, and then they drop back down in spring, summer. So it is a wave throughout the year, at least for NeatCast. Podcasters Assemble, it depends on your content of what you're covering. And we wrapped up in Indiana Jones and all those movies because those had just come out. Before that, I think it was the Jurassic Park movies. They've covered Star Wars, James Bond. The biggest downloads we had was for the 1995 Mortal Kombat movie. When the 2021 Mortal Kombat was coming out, that one got the most downloads out of any episode they've ever done on Podcasters Assemble. For some reason, that's what people wanted to listen to, was 1995's Mortal Kombat. You go back and you watch the movie and go, yeah, this is 95. People wanted to
Yeah,
hear it.
that's very interesting you say that because you regularly have to go back to see how episodes do, and depending on the movie
Mm-hmm.
you're picking, kind of how people are reacting. And it's important to know for everyone working on a podcast that there will be fluctuations
Oh,
because there
yeah.
can be such a drop in
Um,
motivation, right? When you see the numbers themselves drop and then you don't expect them to go back up again.
I do this, and I know Jeremy and Mike at NeatCast and Bobby and Griff, Rick at Effin Cultured have all said, we're doing this because we're having fun. It's great when you do see the numbers go up, and when you do see them go down, you go, huh, did we do something wrong? It doesn't make me, and I can't speak for the others, but it doesn't make me go, well, I guess I'm not made out for podcasting because the numbers are going down. But I do wonder, did we do something wrong? Was there something we didn't cover? Is it the fact that we had a different lineup? There's a lot of different things that you take into account. Did we not use the correct keywords of the week? And what I found, at least with NeatCast, when you have a good creative title that will grab someone's interest, this is something relevant and I want to listen to it, or what is this? What is the Florida skunk ape? And then you try to grab them with a couple different titles, and hopefully they'll come in and give it a listen.
Yeah.
Through social media, it's continuously commenting, sharing, trying to be relevant. So always trying to throw something out there. The goal is to get in front of the people that have no idea you exist.
This is perfect because it's the most productive thing you can do rather than sulking and feeling bad about it. Just think objectively, removing yourself from the situation, not taking it personally, and really looking at all the different factors. Then you can adapt and just see what actually was the reason and how you can improve.
Try not to get discouraged. As long as you are having fun, always try to be releasing something. You always want to have something out there so that people can listen, even if you don't have time for a full episode, which has happened to us at the NeatCast many times. Our episode numbers are only around 127, technically, for a full episode, but we've released so many different shorts or half an episode. We still want to put something out, but it's just not a full episode. If you need to step back, take care of yourself, because if you're getting burned out, your listeners are going to figure that out. You're not going to be bringing the best form of content. And it's better for you to just say, I need some time. I took a step back from all podcasting for about 8 weeks, because my wife and I had our second daughter. She's currently 13 weeks, but it was, all right, well, my family needs to take priority. We have a brand new baby. We need to take care of this, work out the schedule. After about a month and a half, we've got the schedule. We're good. I can start doing some podcasting, and it's not going to interrupt our family time and taking care of what matters. Some people do get burned out and have to step back. Just take care of yourself.
Yes, for sure. And I think I see that conversation a lot on social media about burnout and people not knowing how to stop and take care of themselves. If you're not at your 100%, your listeners are going to figure it out, especially if they're longtime listeners. They know you and their typical content. So, and I think also being upfront about that with your listeners, maybe doing like a drop on your feed really quickly, announcing that you're going to take a break, doing so on social media is so important. So we're going to have Lauren Pacell on the show as well, and she's going to be talking about feed swaps for sure, among other marketing strategies. So, there's things you can do that are sustainable and still keeping your feed going and your listeners involved. So, yes, great tip.
Especially if you want to remain relevant. You don't want your listeners to forget about you or replace you. That's why you always want to have something there, even if it's small. Preempting any sort of break helps. For me as a listener, there's been a couple podcasts I listened to, and they just stopped. They just went away. And I listened to their 100th episode. They sounded like they were coming back, and it's been 6 months, and I haven't heard anything. They haven't posted anything. I don't know if they're on break or hiatus. I also have some good podcasters that I really like. His name's Tim McCarthy, 20 Tim Minutes. He hosted a mental health podcast, and he did so much to help bring awareness to mental health. He was up front and said, hey, everybody, I got to take a step back. And the comments from all of us as listeners and other podcasters was, you take care of yourself, man. And when you come back, we'll be here. You're a great content creator. Take care of yourself. And if that's, a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, whatever, you got to take care of yourself, because you can't bring prime content if you are burned out or you're mentally just struggling.
I love that, because It's not an easy decision to take or even to communicate. There's an in between. If you want to slow it down but still be present, mini episodes are great. Me personally, I love mini episodes. I just add like 5 of them to my queue and I get through them. And being transparent with your audience definitely is super important.
Hmm.
So, how have you used social media so far? I mean, except everything that you've said, of course, all of the strategies and interacting with people. Have you used or experimented at all with video content, or do you have podcast friends that have done so? What are your thoughts?
So for me, the social medias that I have used has been Twitter and Facebook. I haven't learned the Instagrams and the Tickety Talks and all those, but I know people that do, and I know quite a few podcasts that have done that. They incorporate using dropping videos here and there, shorts here and there. Does that correlate to more downloads? I don't know. I can't speak to that, but they are continuing to do it. They are continuing to see a lot of exposure and interaction on those other platforms, whether it be Instagram or TikTok, putting your brand out there. But if you are putting your brand out there, it may result in another listener or two, and it may not, but it's better than not putting your branding out there. I know a podcaster that started as a group of podcasters. He then went solo, and now he's made the transition from audio podcasting to being on YouTube. He is a graphic designer. He makes videos, very entertaining, and he's continuing to grow his YouTube channel. For me, I can only watch him at work here and there because I am someone who listens while you commute. But I know a lot of other podcasters, his name's DT over at Space Castle, will take a video and also throw it up on YouTube so that you're getting the audio in your podcast platform, but then you can also maybe watch it live on YouTube. People have a fascination with seeing people that they usually listen to. What about all these YouTubers that I never see their faces when they're playing through games? What do they really look like? And they want to see. Even though we're an audio medium, sometimes there's things that you need to see through the camera, especially if someone makes a comment and you just give them a look. You hear the silence of the podcast and you know someone's getting a look, but on the video you can go, oh, he's getting a look.
Yeah, that's true. And I've actually noticed a lot of podcast listeners kind of have an affinity for watching video at the same time. So some listeners maybe don't even go on Spotify, but they just directly go on YouTube and they have their favorite picks. And I think what you said about branding is also very important. All techniques are basically, you just got to give it a go and see how it turns out. It is really helpful in building your brand and engaging with your listeners and keeping that community engaged. So, yeah, audiograms with Recast Studio or other kinds of, like short videos, they definitely help. Give it a go. Don't feel like you have to post every day. That's not something that's sustainable, but it's another trick that you can play around with.
And there's a lot of options out there for a content creator. Most of our stuff we use just Audacity, jump on a Discord server, record it, and then we throw it to whoever's editing. Mike handles editing for NeatCast. I do some editing for Podcasters Assemble. Sometimes it's the local content. Sometimes we use a provider like Recast. There's a lot of options for you to go and make your content.
That's the beauty of it. I think that podcasting is an accessible medium that anyone can just hop on and, it's a lot of work, but it's accessible compared to other mediums. What is your top advice for someone starting out or in the beginning stages of creating a podcast? What would it be?
So I would say have an idea. It doesn't have to be fully flushed out, but have an idea of what you want your content to be. Also, do a search and make sure that whatever name you're thinking about using, nobody else has that name. Make sure there isn't anything similar to that name because you want to make sure, again, that you are unique, that you will stand out, not just content, but also by your name. Make sure you're easy to find, whatever hashtag or name that you're going to choose. You probably don't want to make it super long just because it's going to be harder for people to find you. As you develop your content, it's totally fine to change. It's totally fine to adjust. You may have an image and an idea of where you want to go, and then you may find something that works better. Another good podcaster I know, Brian, who does My Weekly Mixtape. He used to do a different podcast called Playlist Wars. And it was a great concept of he had a co-host and they would have a guest on and they would create a playlist and then you would vote on which one was better. And now Brian has gone a different direction with My Weekly Mixtape and has taken off where he grabs podcast guests or people from the music industry and they make a mixtape back in, the days, because I'm old, that we used to use tapes, before digital media. And that's really worked for him. He's been picked up by a network and I couldn't be happier. It's awesome when I see someone I know succeeding. We all want that success, but when you see someone else that going, wow, they're taking off, that's awesome. I guess that's my input for at least getting started.
That's amazing. And that's exactly the energy that encompasses the podcasting industry. It has such amazing people within it, and everyone's really rooting for each other. Thank you for being on the show, behind the content, and for sharing your wisdom, experience, and knowledge with us and the listeners. Can you also share where people can find you on Twitter, where they can find your podcasts?
So for me, the easiest thing to do is on Twitter. I use that predominantly for pushing the podcast is at Zack Deuce. That's where I will share the different episodes that I'm with for NeatCast or Effin Cultured or Podcasters Assemble. All the details are there as well for people to go and find each podcast individually. You can go and download back catalogs or the most recent episodes. Like with Podcasters Assemble, other content creators can actually submit their content for the upcoming movies. Right now, we are actually starting Studio Ghibli with all of the cartoons that they used to do. I've never seen a Ghibli movie, so I'm going into this blind, so I get to watch a movie and just send my thoughts along, going, I have no idea what to expect, but I know they're highly rated and award-winning. Make sure you go and leave them a review and a rating. Not just so that they get found, but also let them know how they're doing.
Yeah, love that so much. Definitely go check out Zack's podcast. He co-hosts and guests on a bunch of different ones, talking about everything pretty much. And also, if you're a movie fan, check out Podcasters Assemble too.
Well, thank you so much for having me.